The blood-red sun sank low on the horizon as Caleb Lawson drove the last nail into the fence post, his raw hands trembling with exhaustion and pain. The year was 1878, and the unforgiving Texas landscape had shown no mercy to the young rancher who'd staked his claim on this patch of dusty earth just west of San Antonio. With sweat dripping from his brow and blood seeping from his cracked palms, Caleb never heard the approaching wagon until its wheels crunched to a halt behind him. "Good heavens! Your hands, sir!" The voice, sweet yet commanding, belonged to a woman he'd never seen before. Lillian Gallagher had arrived in town only yesterday, and her first venture beyond the settlement had brought her face to face with a man working himself to death. Caleb straightened his tall frame and turned, instinctively hiding his hands behind his back. "Madam," he nodded, the single word carrying the weight of his exhaustion. At 28, he'd spent more than a decade building this ranch, and strangers, especially well-dressed women with concerned green eyes, weren't a common sight on his property. "Those hands need attention," Lillian insisted, already climbing down from her wagon with surprising grace for someone wearing a traveling dress. At 24, she carried herself with the confidence of someone much older. "I'm a doctor's daughter. Please, let me help." Caleb shook his head, backing away a step. "I appreciate your concern, Miss Gallagher, Lillian Gallagher." She'd already retrieved a small medical bag from her wagon, "and I'm not leaving until those hands are properly tended to. Miss Gallagher, I've got cattle to move, and you'll do that much better once you've let those hands heal." She'd closed the distance between them and boldly reached for his arm, turning his palm upward to reveal the torn skin and dried blood. "As I suspected. Now sit, Mr. Lawson." Caleb Lawson. He found himself obeying, sinking onto a nearby stump while this forward woman knelt in the dirt beside him, unconcerned about her fine dress. Lillian worked with practiced efficiency, first cleaning the wounds with water from her canteen, then applying an ointment that stung fiercely before soothing the pain. As she wrapped clean bandages around each hand, she looked up at him with determination in her eyes. "Rest," she said firmly. "These hands have done enough for today." Little did either of them know that this chance encounter would change both their lives forever. Caleb watched in stunned silence as Lillian packed her supplies back into her medical bag. No one had tended to his wounds since his mother passed 10 years ago. The feeling was both foreign and oddly comforting. "What brings you out this way, Miss Gallagher? It's not exactly safe for a woman alone." Lillian secured her bag and stood, brushing dust from her skirts. "I've come to live with my uncle, Thomas Gallagher. He owns the mercantile in town. As for being alone, I've managed quite well across half the country to get here." "Thomas is your uncle," Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Good man. Extends credit when times are hard." "Yes, well, after my father died, Uncle Thomas was kind enough to offer me a place. Philadelphia held too many memories." She glanced around the ranch, taking in the half-built structures and vast expanse of land. "You're doing all this alone," Caleb flexed his bandaged hands, wincing slightly. "Got a hand that comes by when he can. Miguel Rodriguez, but he's got his own family to tend to." "And you have no family." Her directness might have offended him from someone else, but there was genuine concern in her voice. "Not anymore," he answered simply. Lillian nodded, understanding passing between them the kind that only exists between those who have experienced loss. "Well, Mr. Lawson, I expect you to keep those bandages clean. I'll be back in 3 days to check on you." "That's not necessary, Miss Gallagher." "I can manage 3 days," she repeated firmly, climbing back onto her wagon seat. "And do try to rest those hands or all my good work will be for nothing." Before he could protest further, she had turned her wagon around and was heading back toward town, the dust from her wheels hanging in the air like a promise. Caleb stood there for a long moment, looking down at his bandaged hands. They felt better already, though he'd never admit it aloud. Something about Lillian Gallagher stirred feelings he thought had died years ago, buried alongside his parents and sister after the fever took them. The next morning, Caleb awoke with the sun as always, but the simple task of dressing proved challenging with his bandaged hands. He cursed under his breath, remembering Lillian's stern instructions to rest, but cattle didn't feed themselves, and fences didn't mend on their own. By midday, he'd managed to check his herd and was attempting to repair a broken wagon wheel when he heard hoofbeats approaching. His hand instinctively moved toward the rifle leaning against the barn wall, but he relaxed when he recognized Miguel Rodriguez riding toward him. "Caleb, my friend," Miguel called, dismounting with an easy grace. "What happened to your hands?" Caleb shrugged, embarrassed. "Working too hard, I guess. Had a visitor yesterday, the new woman in town, Miss Gallagher." Miguel's eyebrows shot up. "Ah, the doctor's daughter from back east. People in town are already talking about her. Seems she's quite knowledgeable about medicine herself." "She's certainly not shy about giving orders," Caleb muttered. Miguel laughed, a rich sound that filled the yard. "Good. Someone needs to tell you when to slow down." He gestured to the wagon wheel. "Let me take over. Isabella sent food. She worries you're getting too thin." Grateful for the help but uncomfortable with the charity, Caleb reluctantly stepped aside. "I can pay you for today's work." Miguel waved him off. "Save your money for more cattle, or perhaps for courting the doctor's daughter," Caleb nearly choked. "I barely know her, Miguel." "Yet she was here, tending to your wounds," Miguel observed with a knowing smile. "In my country, we have a saying, sometimes the heart recognizes in minutes what the mind takes years to accept." "Your country has too many sayings," Caleb grumbled, but there was no heat in his words. Miguel had become more than a hired hand over the years. He was perhaps the closest thing to a friend Caleb had allowed himself. As promised, 3 days later, Lillian's wagon appeared on the horizon. This time, Caleb was ready, having made an effort to clean up both himself and the cabin. He'd even had Miguel's wife, Isabella, bring over fresh bread and stew the day before, which he now had warming on the stove. Lillian seemed surprised by the welcoming smell when she entered the cabin after a polite knock. "Mr. Lawson, it appears you've been expecting me." "Caleb, please," he offered, suddenly feeling awkward in his own home. "And yes, you were quite clear about your return. Would you care for some coffee, or perhaps some stew?" "Coffee would be lovely, Caleb." She smiled, setting down her medical bag. "And you may call me Lillian." As he poured the coffee, she moved around his cabin, examining the sparse furnishings and the few personal items displayed a daguerreotype of his family. A carved wooden horse his father had made him, a small collection of books that had been his mother's. "You read Wordsworth?" she asked, spotting a volume of poetry. "My mother did," he admitted. "I keep meaning to, but there's always something more pressing than poetry out here." "Perhaps," Lillian said thoughtfully, "but beauty and meaning can be found even in the harshest environments." She accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "Now let's see those hands." To her satisfaction, the wounds were healing well. She applied fresh ointment and wrapped them with new, lighter bandages. "Much better. You've been resting them." The guilty look on his face answered before his words could. "I thought as much," she sighed. "Men are the same everywhere, too stubborn for their own good." "I've had help," Caleb defended himself. "Miguel's been coming by." "Well, that's something, at least." She finished her work and stood up, brushing close to him in the small confines of the cabin. For a moment, neither moved, caught in an unexpected awareness of each other. Caleb cleared his throat. "The stew should be ready if you'd care to stay for lunch." Lillian hesitated only briefly. "I would like that, thank you." They ate together at Caleb's small table, the conversation flowing more easily than either had expected. Lillian spoke of her life in Philadelphia, her father's medical practice, and her own informal training at his side. Caleb shared stories of building his ranch from nothing, the challenges and rare triumphs of the past decade. "Why did you come out here alone?" she asked finally, the question that had been lingering since their first meeting. Caleb stared into his coffee cup for a long moment. "After the fever took my family, there wasn't anything left for me in Missouri. I needed space, room to breathe without the ghosts." He looked up at her. "Why did you really come to Texas? A woman with your education could have found a position in any eastern city." Lillian's gaze didn't waver. "Perhaps I needed space as well. Philadelphia had too many expectations of what a doctor's daughter should be and do. Marry well, host dinners, bear children." She shook her head. "I wanted more. I wanted to use what my father taught me. And are you finding what you wanted here?" A small smile played at her lips. "I'm beginning to think I might." After lunch, Caleb walked Lillian to her wagon. As she was about to climb up, she paused and reached into her bag, pulling out a book. "Wordsworth," she said, holding it out to him. "My copy. Perhaps you'll find time for a poem or two now." Caleb took it carefully in his bandaged hands. "I'll try." "That's all anyone can ask," she replied, her eyes lingering on his face before she turned and climbed into her wagon. As Lillian drove away, Caleb stood watching until she disappeared over the rise. The book in his hands felt like more than just pages, and binding it felt like a connection to something he'd thought forever lost. That evening, by lamplight, Caleb opened the book to find a folded piece of paper marking a page. On it, in delicate handwriting, was a note. Words, like nature, half reveal and half conceal the soul within. Below that, she'd written simply, "I'll return in a week to check your progress with both the poetry and your hands. LG." Despite himself, Caleb smiled in the empty cabin. The next day brought unexpected trouble to Caleb's ranch. A group of 3 riders approached around midday, their manner immediately setting him on edge. He recognized the lead man, Francis Blackwell, owner of the largest ranch in the county and known for his ruthless business practices. "Lawson," Blackwell called out, not bothering to dismount. "Been meaning to have a word with you." Caleb stood his ground in the yard. "What can I do for you, Blackwell? Word is you're planning to buy the Matthews place next door." Caleb kept his expression neutral, though he wondered how Blackwell had learned of his negotiations with the elderly widow Matthews. "Mrs. Matthews and I have discussed it." Blackwell spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Well, you can stop your discussions. I'm buying that land. Mrs. Matthews has already agreed to sell to me," Caleb said calmly, though his pulse quickened. The Matthews property had water rights that would secure his ranch's future, and he'd been saving for years to make the purchase. "Things change," Blackwell smirked, his eyes cold. "Old woman might find ranching neighbors less reliable than she thought. Cattle have a way of breaking through fences, trampling crops. Would be a shame." The threat was clear. Caleb's hands, still bandaged, curled into fists. "Is that how you do business, Blackwell? Threatening widows?" One of Blackwell's men moved his hand to rest on his holstered gun, but Blackwell held up a hand, stopping him. "Just giving friendly advice, Lawson. Stay small, mind your own affairs, and we'll all get along fine." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Good day." As the men rode away, Caleb fought to control his anger. He couldn't afford a direct confrontation with Blackwell, who had money, men, and the ear of the county judge. But he couldn't let the threat stand either. After finishing his chores, Caleb rode into town to see Mrs. Matthews. The elderly woman received him in her modest home with genuine warmth. "Caleb, dear boy, your hands," she exclaimed, noticing his bandages. "Just some cuts, madam. They're healing," he assured her. "Mrs. Matthews, has Francis Blackwell approached you about your land?" Her expression darkened. "Yesterday. Offered twice what we agreed upon." She poured tea for them both. "I told him I'd already given my word to you." Relief washed over Caleb. "Thank you. But if he offered more, money isn't everything, young man," she interrupted. "My Harold and I built this place with love. Your parents were good neighbors and friends. I'd rather sell to someone who will respect the land than to a man like Blackwell who only sees dollars." Caleb nodded gratefully. "I promise I'll honor your trust, Mrs. Matthews, but Blackwell made some threats today that concern me." "Oh." Her eyes were sharp despite her age. "He implied he might cause trouble for you if you don't sell to him." Mrs. Matthews snorted. "That man has been trying to intimidate me for years. My shotgun and I have come to an understanding with his kind." Despite his worry, Caleb laughed. "Still, please be careful and let me know if anything happens." "I will," she promised. "Now tell me about these bandages. Miguel's wife mentioned a young lady doctor had been seen riding out to your place." Caleb felt his face warm. "Not a doctor. Miss Gallagher, the mercantile owner's niece." "Ah," Mrs. Matthews smiled knowingly. "Thomas's niece, lovely girl, helped set Mrs. Parker's broken wrist last week. Everyone's talking about how skilled she is. She's—" Caleb struggled to find the right words. "She's forthright." "Good. You need someone forthright in your life, Caleb Lawson. Too long alone with your cattle and your fences." She patted his arm. "Now, when are you bringing her to meet me properly?" "It's not like that, Mrs. Matthews," he protested weakly. "Not yet, perhaps," she replied with a wink. "But I wasn't born yesterday." Caleb left Mrs. Matthews' house feeling both reassured about the land sale and unsettled by her assumptions about Lillian. He decided to stop at the mercantile before heading back to the ranch, needing supplies and, though he wouldn't admit it to himself, curious about seeing Lillian again. The bell above the door jingled as he entered Thomas Gallagher's store. The older man looked up from behind the counter and smiled in welcome. "Caleb, good to see you." Thomas came around to shake his hand, then noticed the bandages. "What happened there?" Before Caleb could answer, a voice from the back room called out, "Mr. Lawson is learning the hard way that human skin isn't as tough as leather." Lillian emerged carrying a stack of folded fabric, which she set down before approaching. "You're healing well, I hope." "Yes, madam," Caleb replied, suddenly conscious of Thomas watching them with interest. "I see you've already met my niece," Thomas observed, his eyes twinkling. "Miss Gallagher was kind enough to help when I injured my hands," Caleb explained, trying to sound casual. "Lillian has a gift," Thomas said proudly. "Already made herself indispensable around here. Half the town comes in with their ailments now." Lillian shook her head. "Uncle exaggerates. I've merely offered what limited knowledge I have." "Setting a broken wrist is hardly limited knowledge," Caleb pointed out, remembering Mrs. Matthews' words. "You heard about Mrs. Parker?" Lillian looked surprised. "News travels fast in small towns," Thomas chuckled. "Especially good news." Caleb picked up the supplies he needed while Thomas tallied them in his ledger. As he was preparing to leave, Lillian approached him again. "I was planning to ride out next week as promised, but if you're in town now, perhaps I could check your hands." "They're fine, really," Caleb insisted, then saw the determined look in her eye and relented. "But if you'd like to take a look, I'd be obliged." Thomas excused himself to help another customer, and Lillian led Caleb to a small room behind the store that had been set up with basic medical supplies. "Uncle has allowed me to use this space for treating minor injuries and illnesses," she explained, gesturing for Caleb to sit on a straight-backed chair. As she unwrapped his bandages, Her touch was professional yet gentle. Caleb found himself watching her face as she concentrated, noting the small furrow between her brows and the way she bit her lower lip slightly while examining the healing cuts. "Much better," she pronounced. "Another week and you should be able to work without bandages, though I'd recommend gloves for a while after." "Thank you," Caleb said sincerely, "not just for this but for stopping that day. Not many would have." Lillian looked up, meeting his gaze. "I'm learning that people out here look after one another. It's different from the city. Different better or different worse. Just different," she said thoughtfully. "Though there's something to be said for neighbors who care about each other's welfare." Caleb nodded. "Speaking of neighbors, I wanted to ask, have you heard anything about Francis Blackwell?" Lillian's expression changed. "Uncle has mentioned him. Not favorably, I must say. He's causing some trouble for me, trying to prevent me from buying neighboring land." Caleb hesitated. "He's not someone to cross lightly. Are you afraid of him?" she asked directly. "Cautious," Caleb corrected. "He has influence, money, men willing to do his bidding. I'm just one rancher trying to build something." Lillian finished rewrapping his hands with fresh bandages. "Sometimes one person standing firm can make all the difference, Caleb." "Is that another piece of Eastern wisdom?" he asked with a small smile. "No," she replied seriously. "That's something I learned from my father. He often stood alone against powerful interests when it came to treating patients others wouldn't touch." She tied off the last bandage. "He taught me that courage isn't about being fearless, it's about doing what's right despite your fear." Caleb felt something shift inside him at her words. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," she said softly. "I hope I honor his memory with my choices." Before Caleb could respond, Thomas called from the store. "Lillian, the Wilsons are here with their baby. Seems the little one has a fever." "I must go," she said, quickly gathering her supplies. "Remember to keep these clean and try to rest them when possible." "Yes, madam," Caleb replied, standing. "And Lillian, thank you." She paused at the doorway, something unspoken passing between them before she hurried to her new patients. On the ride back to his ranch, Caleb's thoughts kept returning to Lillian, her competence, her directness, the way her eyes seemed to see right through his carefully constructed defenses. It had been years since he'd allowed himself to think of a woman as anything more than a passing acquaintance, but Lillian Gallagher was proving impossible to categorize so simply. The next few days passed in a blur of ranch work. Miguel continued to help, bringing news from town with him each day. According to Miguel, Lillian had quickly established herself as a medical practitioner of sorts, treating everything from fevers to minor injuries. The town doctor, an elderly man named Dr. Simmons, had apparently welcomed her assistance, especially with cases requiring a delicate touch. "They say she has magic in her hands," Miguel reported as they repaired a section of fence together. "Even old man Jenkins let her treat his gout, and you know how he feels about newfangled medicine." Caleb smiled at the thought of the cantankerous farmer submitting to Lillian's care. "She's certainly determined. Like someone else I know," Miguel observed with a meaningful look at Caleb's still bandaged hands. "Different situation entirely," Caleb muttered. "Of course," Miguel agreed, too quickly. "Though Isabella says Miss Gallagher has been asking about you." Caleb nearly dropped the hammer he was holding. "What?" "Just inquiring about your ranch, how long you've been here, that sort of thing." Miguel's expression was innocently neutral. Natural curiosity about a patient, I'm sure. Before Caleb could respond, they heard a rider approaching fast. Both men turned to see a young boy from town, Timothy Wilson, galloping toward them on a lathered horse. "Mr. Lawson," the boy called out, reining in hard. "Come quick. There's trouble at Mrs. Matthews' place." Caleb's heart sank. "What kind of trouble, Tim?" "Men, there are 3 of them." They're threatening to burn her crops if she don't sign some papers. The boy was breathless. Ma sent me to fetch you. Miss Gallagher's already gone over. Lillian went there. Caleb was already striding toward the corral where his horse was kept. Yes, sir. She was at our place checking on the baby when Mrs. Matthews' hired hand came running for help. Caleb swung up onto his horse, ignoring the pain in his hands as he gripped the reins. Miguel, go, his friend said firmly. I will follow with others. Caleb spurred his horse toward the Matthews farm, fear and anger mixing in his gut. Blackwell had made good on his threats, and now Lillian had placed herself in danger as well. He pushed his horse hard, covering the 3 miles to the Matthews place in record time. As he approached, he could see 3 horses tied at the fence and several figures in the yard. He slowed his pace, not wanting to gallop into an ambush, and approached more cautiously. The scene that came into view made his blood run cold. Mrs. Matthews stood on her porch, shotgun in hand. Facing her were 2 of Blackwell's men, while a third held a torch near her small wheat field. Lillian stood beside the elderly woman, her posture straight and defiant. "This is your last chance, old woman," one of the men was saying. "Sign the deed over, or watch everything burn." "I told you before," Mrs. Matthews replied, her voice shaking but resolute. "This land isn't for sale to Blackwell at any price." "Then you'll have nothing left to sell to anyone," the man with the torch threatened. Caleb rode into the yard, his hand resting on the revolver at his hip. "That's enough." All eyes turned to him. The lead man, Caleb, recognized him as Jake Harmon, Blackwell's foreman, sneered. "This ain't your business, Lawson." "You're threatening my neighbors. That makes it my business." Caleb dismounted, keeping his movements deliberate. "Put out that torch and get off this property." "Or what?" Harmon challenged. "You against the 3 of us, with those bandaged hands," he laughed. "Blackwell said you were stubborn, but I didn't take you for stupid." "He's not alone," Lillian called out, her voice clear and steady. "The sheriff has been sent for, and half the town knows what you're doing here." Harmon's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. "Sheriff won't side against Blackwell. You all know that." "Perhaps, Mrs. Matthews spoke up, raising her shotgun slightly. "But a jury might take interest in 3 men threatening an old woman and attempting arson." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the distant sound of hoofbeats broke the silence, multiple riders approaching from the direction of town. Harmon cursed under his breath. "This isn't over," he warned, gesturing to his men. The one with the torch reluctantly extinguished it in the dirt. "Blackwell wants this land, and what Blackwell wants he gets." "Not this time," Caleb said firmly, standing his ground as the men mounted up. As Harmon rode past Caleb, he leaned down from his saddle. "Watch your back, Lawson. Accidents happen all the time out here." Caleb didn't respond to the threat, keeping his eyes on the men until they rode away, taking a different route to avoid whoever was approaching. Once they were gone, Caleb hurried to the porch. "Are you both all right?" Mrs. Matthews lowered her shotgun with trembling hands. "Just shaken, dear boy. They showed up demanding I sign papers, and when I refused..." Her voice faltered. "They became threatening," Lillian finished, her face pale but composed. "I arrived just as they were making their intentions clear." Caleb turned to her, unable to keep the concern from his voice. "You shouldn't have put yourself at risk like that." Lillian's eyes flashed. "Would you have me stand by while they intimidated her? I may be new here, but I won't tolerate such behavior, regardless of who's behind it." Before Caleb could respond, several riders appeared. Miguel, along with some of the men from town, and to Caleb's relief, Sheriff Patterson. The next hour was spent explaining what had happened. Sheriff Patterson took notes but was non-committal about what action he would take against Blackwell's men. "It's your word against theirs," he pointed out. No actual harm done. They were threatening arson and coercion, Lillian argued, her professional demeanor giving way to indignation. Surely that warrants some action. The sheriff looked uncomfortable under her direct gaze. Miss Gallagher, I understand you're used to how things work back east, but out here, the law is the law, Sheriff, she interrupted. Or does it apply differently depending on how much land a person owns? A few of the townsmen shifted nervously, but Mrs. Matthews nodded in firm agreement. The girl's right, Sheriff. Either you uphold the law for everyone, or you might as well not wear that badge. Sheriff Patterson's face reddened, but something in the older woman's words seemed to reach him. I'll have a word with Blackwell, he conceded. Make it clear this kind of intimidation won't be tolerated. After the sheriff and others left, promising to keep an eye on the property, Caleb insisted on staying to make sure Blackwell's men didn't return. Miguel went back to finish work at Caleb's ranch, leaving him alone with Mrs. Matthews and Lillian. You two must stay for dinner, Mrs. Matthews insisted. It's the least I can do after you came to my aid. As the elderly woman busied herself in the kitchen, Caleb and Lillian sat on the front porch in the fading light. For a long moment neither spoke, the events of the day settling between them. What you did was brave, Caleb finally said. Foolish, maybe, but brave, Lillian smiled slightly. I could say the same about you, Mr. Lawson. Caleb, he reminded her. Caleb, she echoed, her voice softer. You rode in ready to face 3 armed men alone, he shrugged. Mrs. Matthews has been good to me since I arrived here. I couldn't let them harm her. That's the difference between you and men like Blackwell, Lillian observed. You see people. He sees only obstacles or tools. Caleb looked out over the Matthews farm, smaller than his own, but well tended, with fields of wheat and corn alongside a modest orchard. This land means a lot to her. Her husband built everything here with his own hands. Like you've done with your ranch, Lillian said, studying his profile in the twilight. Trying to, he admitted. Some days it feels like an impossible task. Is that why you work until your hands bleed? She asked gently. Because you feel you have to do everything at once. Caleb flexed his bandaged hands, considering her question. Partly, but also because the work. It keeps the ghosts away. He hadn't meant to say so much, but something about her presence made it easier to speak truths he usually kept buried. The ghosts of your family, he nodded. When I'm working, I don't have time to remember what I've lost, what I'll never have again. Lillian was quiet for a moment before responding. My father used to say that grief is the price we pay for love. The deeper the love, the heavier the grief. Your father sounds like he was a wise man. He was, she agreed, but he also believed that life doesn't end with loss. It changes, transforms, finds new paths. She hesitated. After my mother died when I was 12, he taught me to look forward, not just backward. Caleb turned to face her, struck by the parallel in their experiences. How did you do that? Look forward. By finding purpose, she said simply. For me, it was learning medicine, helping others as my father did. Her eyes met his directly. What's your purpose, Caleb Lawson, beyond keeping the ghosts at bay? The question caught him off guard, making him realize he hadn't thought beyond survival and building his ranch in years. I don't know, he admitted. For so long, it's just been about making it through each day, each season. Perhaps it's time to want more, she suggested quietly. Before he could respond, Mrs. Matthews called them in for dinner, but Lillian's words echoed in Caleb's mind throughout the evening. After dinner, Caleb insisted on escorting Lillian back to town, despite her protests that she could manage alone. Blackwell's men might still be about, he argued as they rode side by side in the gathering darkness. And I'd never forgive myself if something happened to you because of my quarrel with him. Is it a quarrel? She asked. or something more significant? Caleb considered this as their horses walked steadily toward town. Blackwell represents everything I came out here to escape: men who use power and money to control others, who see the land only as something to be claimed and exploited. And what do you see when you look at your land? Possibility, he answered without hesitation. A chance to build something that lasts, something good and true. Lillian smiled in the moonlight. That's a worthy purpose, Caleb. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the night sounds of the prairie surrounding them. Occasionally their eyes would meet, and something unspoken would pass between them, something neither was quite ready to name. As they reached the edge of town, Lillian spoke again. I meant what I said earlier, about it being time to want more. I'm beginning to think you might be right, Caleb admitted, his voice low. They reached the back of Thomas Gallagher's store, where Lillian had a small apartment attached to the main building. Caleb helped her dismount, his hands lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary on her waist. Thank you for the escort home, she said, not immediately stepping away. Thank you for helping Mrs. Matthews, he replied, and for bandaging my hands that first day. Someone needed to remind you to rest, she said with a small smile. You're no good to anyone if you work yourself to death, Caleb Lawson. I'm beginning to see that now. He took a deep breath, gathering courage. Would you consider joining me for dinner at my ranch when things settle down with Blackwell, I mean? In the moonlight, he could see her eyes widen slightly before her smile broadened. I would like that very much. Good, he said, suddenly feeling lighter than he had in years. Good. For a moment they stood there, neither wanting to end the evening. Finally, Lillian took a small step back. I should go in. Uncle will be wondering where I am. Of course, Caleb nodded, reluctantly stepping back as well. Good night, Lillian. Good night, Caleb. She turned to go, then paused and looked back. Be careful riding home and rest those hands, he smiled. Yes, madam. As he rode back to his ranch under the star-filled Texas sky, Caleb realized that for the first time in 10 years, he was looking forward to tomorrow not just as another day of work, but as a day that might bring something new, something he hadn't allowed himself to want until now. The next morning dawned clear and bright, but Caleb's peaceful mood was shattered when he discovered 3 of his cattle slaughtered in the north pasture. The animals had been shot and left to rot, a clear message from Blackwell that their conflict was far from over. Miguel arrived shortly after Caleb made the discovery, his expression grim as he surveyed the scene. This is Blackwell's work, he stated flatly. Everyone knows he does this to ranchers who cross him. Caleb nodded, anger burning cold in his gut. Sheriff Patterson needs to see this. Will he do anything? Miguel asked skeptically. Maybe not, but we need to make it official. Caleb mounted his horse. Can you stay here, make sure nothing else happens? Of course, Miguel agreed. Isabella will bring food later, be careful, my friend. Caleb rode hard into town, his mind racing with possible next steps. He couldn't afford to lose more cattle, but confronting Blackwell directly would likely escalate the situation further. He needed allies, evidence, and a plan. Sheriff Patterson was in his office when Caleb arrived, looking uncomfortable as Caleb described the slaughtered cattle. I'll ride out and take a look, the sheriff promised, though his lack of enthusiasm was evident. But unless someone saw Blackwell's men do it. We both know who's responsible, Caleb said tersely. Patterson sighed, running a hand over his thinning hair. Look, Lawson, I understand your frustration, but Blackwell owns half the county and employs most of the rest. My hands are tied unless I catch his men in the act. So he's above the law, Caleb challenged. I didn't say that, Patterson replied defensively, but this is how things work out here. The big ranchers have always had influence. Disgusted, Caleb turned to leave, but the sheriff's next words stopped him. "There's talk of a railroad coming through. Surveyors were in town last week looking at possible routes." Caleb turned back slowly. "What does that have to do with Blackwell? Think about it," Patterson said meaningfully. "A railway station means development, commerce, higher land values. Blackwell's been buying up every parcel he can get his hands on between here and the river, including, it seems, the Matthews place." Understanding dawned. "He knows where they're planning to build the station." Patterson shrugged. "I'm just saying there might be more to his interest in certain properties than just expanding his ranch." Caleb left the sheriff's office with his mind working furiously. If Blackwell was buying land based on inside information about the railroad, that changed everything. The Matthews property, and possibly parts of his own ranch, could become vastly more valuable in the near future. As he crossed the street toward the Mercantile, planning to speak with Thomas Gallagher about what he'd learned, he nearly collided with Lillian, who was exiting the general store with a basket of supplies. "Caleb," she exclaimed, her initial smile fading as she registered his expression. "What's wrong?" Quickly, he explained about the slaughtered cattle and what the sheriff had told him about the railroad. Lillian's face grew serious as she listened. "This explains why Uncle's been asked about selling the store. A man from back east approached him last week, offering far more than the building is worth." "Did he accept?" She shook her head. "Uncle built this place from nothing after the war. He won't sell unless they make him an offer too ridiculous to refuse, as he put it." Caleb smiled despite the situation. "Thomas is a good man." "Yes, he is." Lillian glanced around the busy street. "This isn't the place to discuss this further. Come inside." Caleb followed her into the Mercantile, where Thomas was helping a customer. The older man nodded in greeting, his eyes curious as he observed Caleb's serious expression and Lillian's concerned one. Once the customer had left, Thomas joined them at the counter. "Something tells me this isn't a social call." After Caleb explained the situation again, Thomas stroked his beard thoughtfully. "Railroad men were indeed in town, stayed at the hotel, asked a lot of questions about land and water rights. If Blackwell knows their plans, he has an unfair advantage," Caleb said. "He could force people to sell without knowing the true value of their land." "Not just unfair, potentially illegal," Lillian pointed out. "Using insider information for personal gain is against the law back east." "This isn't back east," Thomas reminded her gently, "but you're right in principle." He turned to Caleb. "What do you plan to do?" "I don't know yet," Caleb admitted, "but I won't let Blackwell intimidate Mrs. Matthews or destroy what I've built." "You'll need evidence," Thomas advised. "Something that proves Blackwell knew about the railroad plans before they became public." "And you'll need protection," Lillian added firmly. "If he's willing to slaughter cattle to send a message, he might not stop there." Caleb nodded, acknowledging the danger while trying not to worry Lillian further. "I'll be careful." "You should stay in town tonight," Thomas suggested. "The hotel has rooms available, and it might be safer than riding back to your ranch alone." "Miguel and his sons are watching the place," Caleb said, "and I can't leave them to face trouble that's meant for me." Lillian touched his arm lightly. "At least let me check your hands before you go." They should be nearly healed by now. In the back room that served as her examination area, Lillian unwrapped the bandages for what they both knew would likely be the final time. The cuts had healed well, leaving only faint pink lines across his palms. "Good as new," she pronounced, though she didn't immediately release his hands. "Promise me you won't do anything reckless." Caleb looked down at their joined hands, hers smooth and skilled, his calloused from years of hard work. "I promise to be as careful as the situation allows." "That's not particularly reassuring," she said, a hint of frustration in her voice. "It's the most honest answer I can give," he replied. "Blackwell needs to be stopped for everyone's sake." Lillian sighed. "I understand. Just remember that there are people who would miss you if something happened." Her cheeks colored slightly at the admission. "Your neighbors, the community, and you?" he asked quietly, his eyes holding hers. "Yes," she answered simply. "And me." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken feelings. Caleb wanted nothing more than to pull her close, to find comfort in her presence before riding back to face whatever waited at his ranch. But the timing wasn't right, not with Blackwell's threats hanging over them, not with so much unresolved. Instead, he gently squeezed her hands before releasing them. "I'll come back to town tomorrow. We can talk more then." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Tomorrow, then." As Caleb rode back to his ranch, his mind was divided between strategies for dealing with Blackwell and thoughts of Lillian, her concern for him, the feel of her hands on his, the promise of something more between them once this crisis passed. He was so distracted that he almost missed the signs of riders approaching his property from the south. Instinctively, he reined in his horse and moved into the cover of a small stand of trees, watching as 5 mounted men made their way toward his ranch house. Blackwell himself led the group, his expensive clothes and well-groomed appearance standing out among his rougher companions. They stopped at the edge of Caleb's property, surveying the buildings and corrals. Caleb couldn't hear what they were saying, but their presence boded ill. Carefully, he circled around, taking a less direct route to approach the ranch from behind the barn where Miguel and his oldest son, Carlos, were working. 5 riders, Caleb reported in a low voice once he joined them unseen. Blackwell himself with them. Miguel's expression darkened. "This is not good. He rarely does his own dirty work." "Where are your other sons?" Caleb asked, noticing the absence of Miguel's younger boys who often helped around the ranch. "I sent them home when we saw dust on the horizon," Miguel replied. "This is not their fight." Caleb nodded gratefully. "It's not yours either, friend. You should go." Miguel straightened, offended. "You would face them alone. They're here for me, not you," Caleb insisted. "I won't have your family paying for my quarrel with Blackwell." "Without you, there would be no work for me, no food for my children," Miguel said firmly. "We stay." Carlos nodded in agreement, his young face serious beyond his 17 years. "We stand together, Mr. Lawson." Touched by their loyalty, Caleb didn't argue further. "Then let's see what Blackwell wants." The 3 men moved to the front of the barn just as Blackwell and his riders entered the yard. Caleb stepped forward, his stance relaxed but ready, acutely aware of the revolver at his hip. "Blackwell," he acknowledged coldly. "You're trespassing." Francis Blackwell, a heavy-set man in his 50s with silver hair and cold eyes, smiled without warmth. "Lawson, I thought it time we spoke directly, man to man." "About the cattle your men slaughtered?" Caleb asked. "Or about threatening Mrs. Matthews?" Blackwell waved a dismissive hand. "Unfortunate misunderstandings. My men can be overzealous at times." "What do you want?" Caleb demanded, not bothering to hide his contempt. "To make you an offer," Blackwell replied smoothly. "I'll buy your ranch, all of it, for twice what it's worth." Caleb's suspicions about the railroad were confirmed by the generous offer, but he kept his face impassive. "Not interested." Blackwell's smile tightened. "You haven't heard the figure yet." "The figure doesn't matter," Caleb stated. "This land isn't for sale. Not to you, not to anyone." "Everyone has a price, Lawson," Blackwell said, his friendly facade beginning to crack. "Even you." "You're wrong about that," Caleb replied evenly. "Some things aren't for sale at any price." Blackwell studied him for a long moment, as if reassessing his opponent. "You know about the railroad," he concluded. That nosy Gallagher and his interfering niece, I'd wager. Caleb didn't confirm or deny, but Blackwell read the truth in his expression. Well then, Blackwell continued, his voice hardening, let me be direct. The railroad is coming through this valley. Those who cooperate with me will profit. Those who don't. He let the threat hang unfinished. Is that what happened to the Peterson place last year? Caleb asked. Did they not cooperate before their barn mysteriously burned down? Blackwell's eyes narrowed. Accidents happen to the unlucky, Lawson, especially out here where help is far away. I think it's time for you to leave, Caleb said, his hand drifting closer to his gun. The tension in the yard thickened as Blackwell's men shifted in their saddles, hands moving toward weapons. For a long, dangerous moment, violence seemed inevitable. Then, unexpectedly, the sound of approaching riders broke the standoff. All heads turned to see Sheriff Patterson leading a group of townsmen toward the ranch, including Thomas Gallagher, and, to Caleb's surprise and alarm, Lillian. Blackwell cursed under his breath as the newcomers rode into the yard. Sheriff Patterson tipped his hat with exaggerated politeness. Afternoon, Francis. Lawson. Hope we're not interrupting anything. Just a business discussion, Sheriff, Blackwell replied smoothly, though his eyes betrayed his anger at the interruption. Must be important business to bring you out personally, Thomas observed, his tone conversational but his eyes watchful. Lillian moved her horse next to Caleb's, her expression both concerned and determined. We thought you might appreciate some company, she said quietly. Caleb wanted to both thank her and scold her for putting herself in danger, but this wasn't the moment for either. Blackwell surveyed the newcomers with barely concealed fury. This valley's changing, folks. Progress is coming whether you welcome it or not. Those who stand with me will prosper. Those who stand against me. His gaze lingered on Caleb and Lillian. Well, change has its casualties. With that, he wheeled his horse around and rode out, his men following close behind. The tension in the yard dissipated gradually as they disappeared from view. Sheriff Patterson sighed heavily. That man's been a thorn in my side for years, but he's never been this bold before. Something's got him rattled. Competition, Thomas suggested. He's not the only one who knows about the railroad now. Caleb turned to Lillian. You shouldn't have come. It was dangerous. When Uncle told me where the sheriff was heading, I couldn't stay behind, she replied unapologetically. And it seems we arrived at an opportune moment. Caleb couldn't argue with that, though the thought of her facing Blackwell's wrath troubled him deeply. Thank you, he said instead. All of you. Sheriff Patterson dismounted, stretching his back. Don't thank me yet, Lawson. Blackwell won't take this public challenge lightly. He'll retaliate sure as sunrise. Then we need a plan, Thomas said decisively. One that doesn't end with burned buildings or worse. As the others discussed possibilities, Lillian moved closer to Caleb. Are you all right? She asked softly. I am now, he admitted, allowing himself to acknowledge the relief he felt at her presence, despite the danger it put her in. She smiled, understanding more than he said. Good. Because I intend to hold you to your promise of dinner, Mr. Lawson, once this business with Blackwell is settled. Despite everything, the threats, the danger, the uncertainty, Caleb found himself smiling back. I'm looking forward to it, Miss Gallagher. For the next several days, Caleb's ranch became something of a headquarters for those standing against Blackwell's schemes. Thomas Gallagher used his connections with merchants in neighboring towns to gather information about the railroad plans. Sheriff Patterson, finally taking a stand, began investigating reports of intimidation by Blackwell's men. Miguel and other small ranchers organized night patrols to watch for trouble. And Lillian, practical, determined, Lillian divided her time between her medical duties in town and helping coordinate their efforts from Caleb's ranch house, which now felt more like a home than it had in all the years he'd lived there alone. On the fourth evening, as Caleb returned from checking the herd, he found Lillian sitting on his porch, reading by the last light of day. The sight of her there, so natural and right, made his heart catch in his throat. "Any trouble?" she asked, looking up from her book. Caleb shook his head, sitting beside her on the rough-hewn bench. "All quiet. Too quiet, maybe." "Uncle thinks Blackwell may be regrouping," Lillian said. "The railroad surveyors have returned to town, and this time they're being more open about their plans." "Which means Blackwell's advantage is slipping away," Caleb observed. "Makes him more dangerous, not less." Lillian closed her book, turning to face him fully. "We received a telegram today from a colleague of my father's in Philadelphia. He's an attorney who specializes in railroad matters." "And?" Caleb prompted when she paused. "And if Blackwell has been using inside information from the railroad company to purchase land, it constitutes fraud under federal law." Her eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "We just need proof of his communications with the surveyors before their plans were made public." Caleb considered this. "That would be in Blackwell's private papers at his ranch house." "Exactly," Lillian agreed. "Impossible to access legally." "But not necessarily impossible," Caleb mused, an idea forming. "Blackwell hosts a dinner party every year at this time, a celebration of his cattle drive returns. Half the county attends." Lillian caught on immediately, including the sheriff, leaving the ranch less guarded than usual. "It's in 3 days," Caleb continued. "If someone could get into his study while the party is underway." "It would be extremely dangerous," Lillian pointed out, though her tone suggested she was considering the possibility rather than dismissing it. "Less dangerous than waiting for him to burn us out or worse," Caleb argued. "And if we found evidence of fraud, the federal marshals would have to act, regardless of Blackwell's local influence." They sat in thoughtful silence as dusk deepened around them. Finally, Lillian spoke. "It would need to be someone who wouldn't be missed at the party, someone not expected to attend." "Someone like me," Caleb concluded. "Blackwell would never invite me, and his men all know me on sight." "No," Lillian said firmly. "It's too risky if you were caught." "I won't be," Caleb assured her, though they both knew it was a promise he couldn't guarantee. Lillian looked out at the darkening land, her profile etched against the last glow of sunset. "There must be another way." "If there is, we'll find it," Caleb said, though he was increasingly convinced that direct action was their only option. "But we need to be prepared for all possibilities." She turned back to him, her expression resolute. "Then we plan carefully. Nothing left to chance." "Agreed," Caleb said, struck again by her courage and clear-headed determination. "We'll talk to Thomas and the sheriff tomorrow, see what they think." They lapsed into silence again, but it was a comfortable one, filled with shared purpose and growing trust. As the first stars appeared, Caleb found himself acutely aware of Lillian's presence beside him, the subtle scent of lavender that clung to her clothes, the way her hand rested just inches from his on the bench between them. "I never expected any of this when I came to Texas," Lillian said softly. "A quiet life helping in my uncle's store, perhaps treating minor ailments, that was all I envisioned." "And now?" Caleb asked. She smiled, the starlight catching in her eyes. "Now I'm plotting to break into a wealthy rancher's house to find evidence of fraud." "My father would be both horrified and proud, I think." "And you?" Caleb ventured. "Horrified or proud, neither," she replied thoughtfully. "Or perhaps both. But mostly I feel alive, more alive than I have in years." She looked at him directly. "Because what we're doing matters." "It's right, even if it's difficult or dangerous," Caleb nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. I felt dead inside for a long time after losing my family. Building this ranch kept me going, but it was just existing, not living. And now, she echoed his earlier question. Now I have something worth fighting for, he said quietly. Something beyond just survival. The air between them seemed charged with possibility. Slowly, deliberately, Caleb reached out and took her hand in his. Her fingers curved around his, warm and sure. "When this is over," he said, his voice low, "I'd like to court you properly, Lillian Gallagher, if you'd allow it." In the starlight, he saw her smile broaden. "I think I'd like that very much, Caleb Lawson." They sat together under the vast Texas sky, hands entwined, the future uncertain but suddenly full of promise. The next 2 days passed in a flurry of careful planning. Thomas Gallagher used his position as a respected merchant to gather information about Blackwell's ranch layout from delivery men and visiting cowhands. Sheriff Patterson, now committed to their cause after seeing the pattern of intimidation, provided details about which of Blackwell's men would likely be attending the party versus guarding the property. Miguel and his oldest son, Carlos, who knew the surrounding countryside intimately, mapped out approach routes that would allow Caleb to reach Blackwell's ranch house undetected. And Lillian, ever practical, insisted on teaching Caleb basic lock-picking skills she'd learned from a reformed burglar her father had once treated in Philadelphia. "I still don't like this plan," she said as they practiced on a locked drawer in Caleb's desk. "Too many things could go wrong." "Every plan has risks," Caleb replied, concentrating on the delicate tension in the lock. "But doing nothing is riskier still." On the morning of Blackwell's party, they gathered one final time in Caleb's cabin. The plan was set. Caleb would approach Blackwell's property from the west after sundown, using the creek bed for cover. While the party was in full swing in the main house, he would enter through a rarely used side entrance near Blackwell's study. Thomas had confirmed from the mansion's builder that Blackwell kept a safe behind a painting in that room, a safe likely to contain any incriminating correspondence with the railroad officials. "You'll have about an hour," Sheriff Patterson reminded him. "Any longer and you risk someone noticing my absence from the party." Caleb nodded. The sheriff's role was crucial. He would attend the party as expected but create a distraction at a predetermined time, drawing attention away from the wing of the house where Caleb would be searching. "Once you have the documents, head straight for the Miller property," Miguel instructed. "Carlos and I will be waiting there with fresh horses." Thomas handed Caleb a small, loaded derringer. "Only as a last resort," he cautioned. "Getting away clean is more important than confrontation." Throughout these final preparations, Lillian had been unusually quiet. As the others filed out to attend to last-minute details, she remained behind, her expression troubled. "You're having second thoughts," Caleb observed when they were alone. "No," she said after a moment. "I believe this is necessary. I just—" She looked up at him, her eyes filled with emotions she'd kept carefully controlled until now. "I need you to come back safely, Caleb." The simple statement, laden with all she wasn't yet saying, moved him deeply. He stepped closer, taking both her hands in his. "I will. Promise me," she insisted, her voice catching slightly. "Promise you'll be careful, that you won't take unnecessary risks." "I promise," he said solemnly. Then, unable to resist any longer, he leaned down and kissed her gently. It was a brief kiss, tender and filled with promise rather than passion, but it sealed something between them, a commitment that went beyond words or plans. When they separated, Lillian's cheeks were flushed, but her eyes were clear and determined once more. "Well then," she said briskly, though her hand still held his. "You'd better come back because we have much to discuss, Mr. Lawson." He smiled, drawing strength from her resilience. "I look forward to that discussion, Miss Gallagher." As dusk fell, Caleb prepared for his mission. Dressed in dark clothing, with his face smudged with dirt to reduce its visibility, he looked more like an outlaw than a rancher. The comparison would have troubled him once, but tonight he was focused solely on the task ahead. He reached Blackwell's property as planned, using the creek bed for cover until he was within sight of the imposing ranch house. Lights blazed from every window, and the sounds of music and laughter drifted across the grounds. Carriages and horses filled the front drive, confirming that the party was well underway. Moving carefully from shadow to shadow, Caleb approached the darkened west wing where Blackwell's private study was located. As Thomas had reported, a small service entrance stood partially hidden behind ornamental bushes, its lock simple enough for Caleb to pick with the tools Lillian had provided. Inside, the corridor was dimly lit and deserted, the sounds of the party muffled by distance and thick walls. Caleb moved silently, counting doors until he reached what should be Blackwell's study. This lock was more substantial, but yielded to his careful manipulation after tense minutes of work. The study was exactly as Thomas's informant had described: a large, wood-paneled room dominated by a massive desk and lined with bookshelves. On the far wall hung the painting concealing the safe, an uninspired landscape of rolling hills that seemed at odds with Blackwell's preference for ostentatious display. Caleb was halfway across the room when he heard voices approaching in the hallway. Quickly, he ducked behind the heavy velvet drapes covering a window alcove, holding his breath as the door opened and two men entered. "Just a quick smoke, Jake, then we'll rejoin the party," Blackwell's voice, unmistakable in its confident authority. "I want to show you those railroad documents before I lock them away again. The timing couldn't be better for us. Whole Valley's going to be worth a fortune once they announce the depot location," his foreman, Jake Harmon, agreed. "Smart of you to get the inside information before anyone else." "Cost me enough in bribes," Blackwell chuckled. "But it'll pay off tenfold once we've secured all the key properties." From his hiding place, Caleb could see Blackwell moving to the painting and swinging it aside to reveal the safe behind. The rancher worked the combination with practiced ease, then withdrew a sheaf of papers. "Here the official survey maps, showing exactly where the station will be built," Blackwell said, spreading them on the desk. "Right between the Matthews place and part of Lawson's southern pasture. Both properties become instant gold mines once the announcement is made public." "What about Lawson?" Harmon asked. "He ain't selling." Blackwell's voice hardened. "Lawson won't be a problem much longer. After tonight's party, I want you to take care of him permanently. Make it look like an accident." "And the Gallagher woman?" Harmon questioned. "She's been stirring up trouble too." "Unfortunate accidents can happen to meddlesome women as well," Blackwell replied coldly. "Just be discreet. I don't want anything traced back to us." Caleb's blood ran cold at the casual way they discussed murder. He had come for evidence of fraud, but had stumbled upon plans for far worse crimes. Suddenly, a commotion erupted from the direction of the main house, shouting and the sound of breaking glass. "Sheriff Patterson's distraction, right on schedule." "What the hell?" Blackwell growled, moving toward the door. "Jake, put these back in the safe. I'll see what's happening." The moment Blackwell left the room, Caleb made a split-second decision. Rather than remaining hidden, he stepped out from behind the drapes, derringer in hand. "Don't move, Harmon," he ordered quietly. The foreman froze, the papers still in his hands. "Lawson." "How the hell? Put those down and step away from the desk," Caleb instructed, keeping his voice low but firm. Harmon's eyes darted to the door, calculating. "You're making a big mistake." I heard everything, Caleb said. The fraud, the plans to kill me and Lillian, it's over. For a moment, it seemed Harmon might comply. Then, with surprising speed, he lunged across the desk toward Caleb, yelling for Blackwell. Caleb fired the Derringer, the shot hitting Harmon in the shoulder rather than the chest where he'd aimed. The foreman staggered but kept coming, crashing into Caleb and sending them both to the floor. They struggled fiercely, Harmon's superior weight giving him an advantage despite his wound. Caleb managed to twist free momentarily and scramble for the papers on the desk, grabbing them before Harmon could recover. The sound of running footsteps in the hallway told Caleb that reinforcements were seconds away. With no time to relock the safe or cover his tracks, he made for the window, throwing open the drapes and forcing the sash up. As Blackwell burst into the room with two other men, Caleb dove through the open window, landing hard on the ground outside. Pain shot through his ankle, but adrenaline kept him moving as shouts and then gunshots erupted behind him. Staying low, Caleb ran for the creek bed, the precious papers clutched in his hand. A bullet whizzed past his ear, too close for comfort, followed by Blackwell's voice ordering his men to spread out and find the intruder. The night that had begun as a covert mission had become a desperate flight for survival. Caleb ran with all the speed his injured ankle would allow, zigzagging through the darkness toward the safety of the Miller property where Miguel waited. Behind him, he could hear Blackwell's men crashing through the underbrush, getting closer despite his head start. Just as he reached the edge of the Miller land, a shot rang out and Caleb felt a burning pain across his upper arm. He stumbled but didn't fall, pushing forward with renewed desperation. "There!" Miguel's voice called out from the shadows ahead. "Caleb, here!" Reaching the rendezvous point, Caleb found Miguel and Carlos waiting with horses as planned. "They're right behind me," he gasped, swinging painfully into the saddle. "Blackwell ordered Harmon to kill me and Lillian after the party. I got the evidence, but they saw me." "Ride," Miguel commanded, handing him the reins. "We'll split up to confuse them. Meet at the sheriff's office in town." Without time for further discussion, the three men rode in different directions, just as Blackwell's pursuers emerged from the trees, firing wildly into the night. Caleb pushed his horse hard, taking a roundabout route toward town, his mind racing faster than his mount's hooves. Blackwell would know he had the documents and would be desperate to recover them. Worse, he now had nothing to lose. His plans for murder had been overheard, making him all the more dangerous. By the time Caleb reached town, his arm was bleeding freely, and his ankle throbbed with each step as he dismounted in front of the sheriff's office. To his relief, Sheriff Patterson was already there along with Thomas and, to his alarm, Lillian. "Caleb," she cried, running to him as he staggered through the door. "You're hurt." "It's not serious," he assured her, though the room swam slightly as he spoke. "But we need to move quickly. Blackwell knows I overheard his plans, and he'll be coming for these." He held up the blood-stained papers. While Lillian tended to his wounds, Caleb explained what had happened at Blackwell's ranch. Sheriff Patterson examined the documents with growing concern. "These are official railroad surveys, with notes in Blackwell's handwriting indicating bribes paid for inside information," he confirmed, "plus correspondence scheduling private meetings before the public announcement." He looked up grimly. "It's the proof we needed, but it puts all of us in danger until we can get these to the federal authorities." "The nearest federal marshal is in San Antonio," Thomas pointed out. "A day's ride at least." "And Blackwell will have men watching all the roads," Miguel added, having arrived safely minutes after Caleb. "Then we need to get these documents and all of you somewhere safe until help can arrive," Sheriff Patterson decided. Blackwell will expect you to stay in town. We need to move elsewhere, somewhere he wouldn't think to look. Mrs. Matthews, Caleb suggested. Her farm has that root cellar that's well hidden. We could hold out there if necessary. The sheriff nodded. I'll send my deputy to San Antonio for the federal marshals. The rest of us should move to the Matthews place immediately. As they prepared to leave, Lillian finished bandaging Caleb's arm and handed him a small bottle of laudanum for the pain, which he pocketed without drinking. I need to keep my head clear, he explained, then added more quietly, I'm sorry you've been drawn into this danger because of me. Lillian's eyes flashed with the determination he'd come to admire. I'm exactly where I choose to be, Caleb Lawson, and I don't regret it for a moment. Despite everything, his injuries, the danger, the uncertainty of what lay ahead, Caleb felt a surge of emotion so powerful it momentarily took his breath away. When this is over, he said softly, we have that discussion to finish. Her smile, though tense with concern, was genuine. I'm holding you to that promise. They traveled to the Matthews farm in a wagon borrowed from the livery, moving as quickly and quietly as possible through the night. Mrs. Matthews, awakened by their arrival, took in the situation with remarkable composure. Well, she said after hearing their explanation, I've been waiting years for someone to stand up to that bully Blackwell. About time. She led them to the root cellar, a surprisingly spacious underground room accessed through a trapdoor in her pantry. This kept my family safe during Indian raids 40 years ago. Should serve just as well now. Sheriff Patterson organized their defenses, placing Miguel and Carlos as lookouts while he and Thomas secured the house. Lillian helped Mrs. Matthews gather food supplies, and Caleb, despite his injuries, insisted on checking that all windows and doors were barricaded. By dawn, they were as prepared as possible for whatever might come. Caleb sat on the porch steps, watching the sunrise paint the horizon in shades of gold and pink. Despite the beauty, he couldn't shake the feeling that Blackwell would arrive before help could reach them. Lillian joined him, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched. You should rest, she suggested gently. You've lost blood. Soon, he promised. I just needed to see the sun come up. She seemed to understand without further explanation. It's beautiful, isn't it? No matter what happens, the sun rises. There's something comforting in that constancy. Caleb nodded, finding unexpected peace in her presence and perspective. My father used to say that each sunrise is God's way of giving us another chance to get things right. A wise man, Lillian observed. Is that why you're out here? Looking for another chance? Maybe, Caleb admitted. Though I think I might have finally found it, just when everything else is falling apart. Their hands found each other's, fingers intertwining naturally. No further words were needed as they watched the new day emerge, uncertain what it would bring but facing it together. The attack, when it came, was sudden and overwhelming. Shortly after noon, Blackwell arrived with what appeared to be every man he could muster, at least 15 riders, all armed and surrounding the Matthews farm. Lawson, Blackwell's voice boomed across the yard. I know you're in there. Come out with those papers, or we'll burn the place down around you. Sheriff Patterson, rifle in hand, positioned himself at a window. This is madness, Francis. I'm a duly appointed officer of the law and you're threatening civilians. You're harboring a thief and a trespasser, Blackwell retorted. Hand over Lawson and the papers he stole, and no one else needs to get hurt. Those documents prove you committed fraud, the sheriff called back. And I heard your plans to murder Lawson and Miss Gallagher. It's over, Francis. The federal marshals have been sent for. Blackwell's response was a barked order to his men, who opened fire on the house. Everyone inside ducked as bullets splintered wood and shattered glass. To the cellar, Mrs. Matthews ordered, surprisingly calm as she led the way. "This old house has weathered worse." They retreated to the root cellar, the thick earthen walls providing better protection than the wooden structure above. The gunfire continued sporadically, punctuated by Blackwell's repeated demands for surrender. How long until the marshals could arrive? Thomas asked Sheriff Patterson as they huddled in the dim space lit only by a single lantern. If my deputy rode through the night, and if the marshals left immediately. "Late today at the earliest," the sheriff admitted. "More likely tomorrow morning." Caleb exchanged a grim look with Miguel. "We can't hold out that long. Once it gets dark, they'll try to set fire to the house." "Then we need to change the situation before dark," Lillian said firmly. Everyone turned to her in surprise. "Blackwell's power comes from his men. If they knew the full extent of his crimes, that he was planning murder, not just protecting his stolen property, would they all stand with him?" "Probably not," Sheriff Patterson conceded. "Most of them are hired guns, not killers." "Then we need to get that information to them," Lillian continued. "Drive a wedge between Blackwell and his force." Caleb considered this. If someone could get to the barn unseen, they might be able to circle around behind Blackwell's men, approach some of them individually. "Too dangerous," Thomas objected. "They'd shoot on sight." "Not if it was someone they wouldn't expect," Lillian countered, her expression resolute. "Not if it was me." "Absolutely not," Caleb said immediately, echoed by her uncle. "Listen to me," Lillian insisted. "They're looking for you, Caleb, and the other men. They know Mrs. Matthews. But I could be just another frightened woman who was visiting when the shooting started. Many of these men have seen me in town, treating injuries. Some might even have family I've helped." The cellar fell silent as they considered her proposal. Caleb wanted to refuse outright to protect her at all costs, but he recognized the strategic sense in her plan. "It's too risky," he said finally. "Blackwell himself knows you're involved." "But he can't be everywhere at once," Lillian pointed out. "If I can speak to just a few men away from his hearing, plant seeds of doubt." Sheriff Patterson nodded slowly. "It might work, especially if we create a distraction to draw Blackwell's attention elsewhere." "I don't like it," Thomas said, looking worriedly at his niece. "But I don't see many alternatives." Mrs. Matthews, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "There's an old tunnel leads from the cellar to the spring house by the creek. My husband dug it years ago during the Troubles. Hasn't been used in decades, but it should still be passable." This revelation changed everything. With the tunnel, Lillian could exit unseen and approach from a direction Blackwell's men wouldn't be watching. After further discussion, they formed a plan. Sheriff Patterson, Caleb, and Miguel would create a distraction at the front of the house, drawing Blackwell's attention. Meanwhile, Lillian would use the tunnel to reach the creek, then circle around to approach some of Blackwell's men positioned at the edge of the property. As they prepared to implement their plan, Caleb pulled Lillian aside in the dim light of the cellar. "This is even more dangerous than what I did last night," he said quietly. "If Blackwell spots you—" "He won't," she assured him, though they both knew it was a promise she couldn't guarantee. "I'll be careful." Caleb took her hands in his. "Lillian, he stopped, struggling to find words adequate to express what he was feeling. "Just come back safely, please." Understanding all he wasn't saying, Lillian leaned forward and kissed him briefly. "I will. We both have promises to keep." With that, she followed Mrs. Matthews to the concealed entrance to the tunnel, disappearing into its narrow darkness with a final look back at Caleb that held both determination and something deeper, something that gave him both hope and fear in equal measure. The wait after Lillian entered the tunnel was excruciating for Caleb. Every minute seemed to stretch endlessly as he prepared with the others for their part of the plan. His injured arm throbbed, and his ankle protested when he put weight on it. But these physical pains were nothing compared to the worry gnawing at his gut. Finally, Mrs. Matthews gave the signal Lillian should have had enough time to reach the springhouse and begin her approach to Blackwell's men. It was time for their distraction. Sheriff Patterson, Caleb, and Miguel positioned themselves at different windows of the house. At the sheriff's signal, they began firing rapidly into the air and at the ground near Blackwell's position, being careful not to actually hit anyone but creating an impression of aggressive resistance. "You're surrounded, Blackwell," Sheriff Patterson shouted. "Last chance to surrender peacefully." The bold bluff had the desired effect. Blackwell and several of his closest men took cover behind their horses, focusing all their attention on the front of the house. The exchange of gunfire intensified, filling the air with noise and smoke. From his position, Caleb could see Lillian's slim figure moving cautiously along the tree line at the far edge of the property, approaching two of Blackwell's men who had taken position there. His heart seemed to stop as she stepped into view, hands raised to show she was unarmed. The men's reaction was impossible to discern at this distance, but they didn't fire, which Caleb took as a positive sign. Lillian appeared to be speaking earnestly, occasionally gesturing toward the house and then back toward Blackwell. After what seemed an eternity, one of the men nodded and moved away, approaching another group of Blackwell's forces. Lillian continued to the next position, repeating her performance. Slowly, a remarkable thing began to happen. Men started drifting away from Blackwell's main force, first individually, then in small groups. Some simply mounted up and rode off, while others gathered at a distance, watching but no longer participating in the siege. Blackwell, engaged in directing the firefight at the front of the house, didn't immediately notice the desertion. When he finally turned to call for reinforcements and found half his men gone, his bellow of rage carried clearly across the yard. "Where the hell are you going?" He shouted at the remaining men who were now backing away. "Get back here and finish this." "It's over, boss," one called back. "We signed on to help you protect your property, not to murder folks for a land grab. The girl told us what you're really up to." Blackwell's face contorted with fury as he spotted Lillian standing with a group of his former men at the edge of the property. "You," he snarled, raising his rifle toward her. Caleb's blood turned to ice as he saw Blackwell take aim. Without conscious thought, he burst through the front door, firing rapidly to draw Blackwell's attention away from Lillian. The gambit worked. Blackwell swung around, discharging his rifle in Caleb's direction. The bullet tore through the air where Caleb had been a moment before, missing him by inches as he dove for cover. Seeing their leader's willingness to kill, the last of Blackwell's supporters melted away, leaving him effectively alone. Sheriff Patterson emerged from the house, rifle trained steadily on the rancher. "Drop your weapon, Francis," he ordered. "It's finished." For a terrible moment, it seemed Blackwell might choose a suicidal last stand. His eyes, wild with thwarted ambition and rage, darted between Caleb, Lillian, and the sheriff. Then, with a curse, he flung down his rifle. "You've ruined everything," he spat as Sheriff Patterson approached to restrain him. "Everything I've built." "You ruined it yourself," the sheriff replied evenly, securing Blackwell's hands. "When you decided your wealth was worth more than other people's lives." As the tension of the standoff dissolved, Caleb's only thought was reaching Lillian. He limped across the yard as quickly as his injured ankle would allow, needing to assure himself that she was truly unharmed. She met him halfway, her face pale but triumphant. "It worked," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They listened. "You could have been killed," Caleb replied, unable to keep the emotion from his voice. Without caring who might be watching, he pulled her into his arms, holding her as if he never intended to let go. "So could you," she murmured against his chest, "running out into the open like that?" "He was aiming at you," Caleb said simply. "I couldn't let that happen." Lillian pulled back slightly to look up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "We're quite a pair, aren't we? Both too stubborn and reckless for our own good." Despite everything, the danger just passed, his injuries, the uncertainty of what would happen next, Caleb found himself smiling. "Perfect for each other, I'd say." Her answering smile was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. "I believe you may be right, Mr. Lawson." The aftermath unfolded with surprising swiftness. The federal marshals arrived the following morning, taking custody of both Blackwell and the incriminating documents. Charges were filed not only for fraud, but also for conspiracy to commit murder, virtually ensuring that Francis Blackwell would spend many years behind bars. The railroad company, embarrassed by the scandal of their surveyor's corruption, made amends by offering fair prices to all landowners along the proposed route, including Mrs. Matthews and Caleb. The town buzzed with excitement about the prosperity the new railway station would bring, with Thomas Gallagher already planning an expansion of his mercantile to serve the anticipated increase in customers. 2 weeks after Blackwell's arrest, Caleb stood on the porch of his ranch house, surveying the land that had been his sole focus for so long. His arm was healing well, and his ankle barely troubled him anymore. The physical wounds would soon be nothing but scars, reminders of risks taken and overcome. The sound of an approaching wagon drew his attention. Lillian had promised to visit today, and right on time, her familiar figure appeared on the horizon. Caleb felt his heart lighten at the sight, still marveling at how quickly she had become essential to his life. As she drove into the yard, Caleb noticed she had brought a substantial amount of luggage with her, far more than her usual medical bag for checking his injuries. "Planning a longer stay?" he asked as he helped her down from the wagon. Lillian smiled enigmatically. "That depends entirely on you, Caleb Lawson." Intrigued, he escorted her inside, where he had prepared a simple but carefully planned dinner. They ate together comfortably, discussing the latest news from town and her continuing work treating various ailments among the townspeople. "Dr. Simmons has officially asked me to join his practice," she revealed over coffee. "He says at 72 he's ready for some help, especially with his arthritis worsening." "That's wonderful," Caleb said sincerely. "He couldn't ask for a better partner. Will you accept?" "I'm considering it," she replied, watching him carefully. "But it would mean staying in Texas permanently." "Making a life here." Caleb set down his coffee cup, sensing the conversation had shifted to something more significant than career plans. "And is that what you want, to stay?" "That depends," Lillian said again, her voice softening, "on whether there's someone worth staying for." The moment had arrived naturally, without planning or rehearsal, yet Caleb knew exactly what he wanted to say. "Lillian, when you found me that day, working until my hands bled, you didn't just bandage my wounds. You woke something in me that I thought had died with my family hope. The possibility of a future that held more than just work and solitude." He reached across the table, taking her hands in his. "I love you, Lillian Gallagher. I think I started falling in love with you from that first day when you ordered me to rest with such fierce compassion. I know it hasn't been long by some standards, but after everything we've faced together, I'm certain of my feelings. If you'll have me, I want to build a life with you right here." Lillian's eyes shimmered with emotion as she squeezed his hands. "I love you too, Caleb. I came to Texas looking for a fresh start, never imagining I'd find someone who would make me feel so alive, so purposeful." She smiled, her eyes never leaving his. "And yes, I'll have you on one condition." "Name it," he said without hesitation. "That you promise to rest when you need it," she said, her tone light but her eyes serious. "That you'll let me care for you as you care for me. That we'll build this life together, not just side by side." "I promise," Caleb vowed, his heart fuller than he had believed possible after so much loss. "With all my heart." They sealed their promise with a kiss that spoke of healing past wounds and embracing future possibilities. Outside, the Texas sunset painted the land in warm golds and reds, a fitting backdrop to the beginning of their shared journey. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Caleb stood before the town's small church, Miguel at his side as best man, watching as Lillian walked down the aisle on Thomas's arm. Her simple white dress complemented the modest wildflower bouquet she carried, but it was her radiant smile that captivated everyone present. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, with Mrs. Matthews sniffling happily in the front row and Dr. Simmons beaming with approval at his new partner's happiness. Sheriff Patterson attended in his formal uniform, a visible reminder of how much had changed since Blackwell's downfall. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister concluded, his warm voice carrying through the packed church. "Mr. Caleb, you may kiss your bride." As Caleb kissed Lillian to the cheers and applause of their friends and neighbors, he marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a chance encounter on a dusty ranch to partners in both love and purpose, their story had only just begun. The reception afterward at Thomas's store was a joyful celebration, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed half the county. As the evening progressed, Caleb found a moment of quiet with his new wife on the store's back porch, away from the festive crowd. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Completely," Lillian assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Though I'm looking forward to going home." Home. The word held new meaning now. In the weeks following their engagement, they had worked together to transform Caleb's Spartan cabin into a true home. Lillian had added feminine touches: curtains, comfortable furniture, bookshelves filled with both his mother's poetry and her father's medical texts. But more than physical changes, it was their shared presence that had transformed the space, filling it with laughter and purpose. "I have something for you," Caleb said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small, worn book, the copy of Wordsworth she had given him months ago when his hands were still bandaged. "I've been saving this for today." Lillian took it curiously, opening to where a pressed wildflower marked a page. "You've been reading it." "Every night," he admitted. "I found this poem that reminded me of us." He pointed to the marked passage, watching as she read the lines. "For I have learned to look on nature, not as in the hour of thoughtless youth, but hearing oftentimes the still, sad music of humanity, nor harsh nor grating, though of ample power to chasten and subdue. And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns, and the round ocean and the living air, and the blue sky, and in the mind of man." When she looked up, her eyes were soft with emotion. "It's beautiful, Caleb, like you," he said simply. "You taught me to look beyond my grief, to see possibility again, to rest when I needed to so I could build something lasting." Lillian closed the book, holding it against her heart. "And you taught me that sometimes home isn't a place you return to, it's something you create, with courage and persistence and love." As they rejoined the celebration, Caleb reflected on the incredible journey that had brought him to this point. From working alone until his hands bled to sharing his life with a woman who had not only bandaged those wounds, but had healed the deeper ones he'd carried for so long. Together, They would face whatever challenges lay ahead: the continued development of the ranch, Lillian's growing medical practice, the changes the railroad would bring to their community. But they would face it all as partners, supporting each other through difficult times and celebrating the joyful ones. And when the work became too much, when either of them pushed too hard or took on too much, they would remind each other of that first day of bleeding hands bandaged with care, and the simple, profound wisdom of knowing when to rest. 5 years later, Caleb stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Lillian chased their 3-year-old daughter, Emma, through the front garden. Their son, Thomas James, just 6 months old, slept peacefully in his cradle nearby. The sound of their laughter carried on the warm spring air, filling Caleb with contentment so deep it almost ached. The ranch had prospered beyond his wildest hopes. The railway station, built as predicted between his land and what had been the Matthews place, had brought commerce and opportunity to the entire region. Caleb had expanded his cattle operation, hired permanent hands to manage the growing herd, and even ventured into breeding horses, a passion Lillian encouraged. Lillian's medical practice thrived as well. After Dr. Simmons passed peacefully 2 years earlier, she had taken over completely, with Caleb's support building her a proper clinic in town. Her reputation for skill and compassion extended throughout the county, bringing patients from considerable distances seeking her care. "Papa, look," Emma called, holding up a butterfly that had landed on her small finger. "It's like the one in Mama's book." Caleb descended the porch steps to join his family, crouching beside his daughter to admire the delicate creature. "It is indeed, sweetheart, very observant of you." Lillian smiled at them both, her face glowing with love and contentment. At 34, she was more beautiful to Caleb than ever, motherhood and purpose having added a depth to her beauty that took his breath away. "She has your eye for detail," she told Caleb as the butterfly fluttered away and Emma chased after it. "And your determination." "And your compassion," Caleb added, watching as their daughter gently encouraged the butterfly onto a flower rather than capturing it. "She'll be a fine doctor someday if that's what she chooses." "Or a rancher," Lillian countered, slipping her hand into his. "Or both, or something entirely her own." Caleb squeezed her hand gratefully, still amazed after all these years by her ability to see possibilities where others might see limitations. Whatever she becomes, she'll have had the best mother to guide her. They watched Emma playing for a moment longer before Lillian spoke again, her voice soft with contemplation. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out? If I hadn't happened upon you that day, if you hadn't been so stubborn about working until your hands bled?" Caleb considered this. "Sometimes, but then I think that perhaps we were always meant to find each other one way or another." He turned to face her fully. "The path matters less than the destination, and you, Lillian Lawson, are exactly where I was always meant to be." Her eyes shimmered with emotion as she leaned in to kiss him softly. "As are you, my love. As are you." From the cradle came the stirring sounds of Thomas James awakening. Lillian moved to attend to him, lifting the baby with practiced ease and bringing him to join them in the garden. As Caleb gathered Emma in one arm and slipped the other around Lillian's waist, he felt a profound sense of completeness. This was his legacy, not just the prosperous ranch or the respected name he had built in the community, but this family, this love that had grown from a chance encounter into the foundation of a life richer than he had ever dreamed possible. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the land that had once seemed so empty and now felt so full of promise. In the distance, the smoke from a passing train rose against the sky, a reminder of how much had changed, how far they had come. "We should go in," Lillian suggested as the evening breeze picked up. "I have stew simmering for dinner." "In a minute," Caleb said, reluctant to end this perfect moment. "Let's watch the sunset first." As the four of them stood together, bathed in the golden light of evening, Caleb thought again of the hands that had once bled from ceaseless work, and the woman who had bandaged them, insisting he rest. That simple act of kindness had opened the door to everything that followed: love, family, purpose, peace. Some lessons, he reflected, were worth learning over and over again. To work hard but know when to rest. To build something lasting but recognize that the most valuable things couldn't be measured in acres or dollars. To cherish each sunset as a blessing and each sunrise as a promise. "I love you," he whispered to Lillian as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. More with each passing day. Her answering smile held all the warmth and healing that had saved him those years ago. "And I love you, Caleb Lawson. Always." With their children in their arms and the future spread before them like the vast Texas horizon, they turned together toward home, a home built on love, strengthened by challenges overcome, and sustained by the wisdom of knowing when to push forward and when, simply, to rest.